All right, thanks again, Brenda, and welcome everyone. I see from the attendee list we've also had quite a few people from our previous session join, so welcome again, and it's nice to have a bunch of you back. So continuing where we left off from last week, I'll jump right in. For some of those that have joined our session for the first time, I'll give you a quick overview about our business. Intuit has certified our company as a gold developer for QuickBooks integration applications. Our flagship product is ECC, which is also known as an e-commerce connector. This application essentially allows you to connect across 20+ online shopping carts and marketplaces such as eBay and Amazon. We also work with a number of shipping carriers, and it currently integrates with all the PC editions of QuickBooks. We have customers here in the US, Canada, UK, Australia, and South Africa. And we have offices both in Phoenix and several development and support centers in India. Jumping into kind of the agenda for our presentation today, we're going to take, again, a quick look at the features provided by ECC. And from a demo standpoint, I know you're all anxious to learn more about how to set up ECC. So we're going to look at how to manage your profile, how to download the settings, set up customers, payment details, your taxes and discounts, and packing slips. So we'll try to cover as much ground as we can in the webinar today. You're welcome to, as Brenda mentioned, ask any questions using the GoToWebinar chat window or the question window that you see in your GoToWebinar panel. So in terms of an overview of the ECC product, the diagram that you've probably seen from the homepage of our site and throughout different aspects of it, primarily ECC is a connector between your online store and your QuickBooks. Along with that, it provides shipping and inventory management capabilities. And being a multi-channel application, you can connect not only one, but more than one store, and also different marketplaces, all from a central application. Apart from processing of orders and posting to QuickBooks, ECC has built-in shipment processing. It also has the ability to synchronize products, and you have a built-in scheduler to basically automate various aspects of the application. And along with being able to perform these tasks as a single user, you can also set up ECC in a multi-user environment. So if you've got someone on your staff that does shipping and someone else that does QuickBooks accounting, for example, you can set up ECC on 2 separate computers and also specify the settings so that each user performs their individual tasks. As I also mentioned, ECC is multi-profile capable, and we'll talk a little bit more about multiple profiles in our demo here. But overall, from a process standpoint, the first process involved with ECC is the downloading of orders, which can either be done on demand by clicking the Download Orders button or using the automated scheduler. The second is the process shipping aspect, where you can connect with a number of different shipping carriers, and which eventually results in a tracking number that gets pulled back into ECC. The third is posting of the order into QuickBooks. Again, this can be done at the click of a button or using the automated scheduler. And last but not least, the order gets marked completed, and a confirmation email is triggered to your customer via your website once ECC pulls the tracking and the order status back to your online store. So that kind of completes the order flow, and in general, ECC comes into the picture as soon as the customer has placed an order on your website. So in the last week's demo, we covered a sample scenario, and we'll kind of continue with that same setup here. We'll assume that I'm an electronics retailer, and I use Magento for my shopping cart. For the purposes of this demo, even though I'm specifying Magento as my kind of sample cart, we'll try and cover as many scenarios as we can. So even if you have a different shopping cart, most of the terminology and the processes we discussed today should be fairly applicable across the board. I will use for this demo the QuickBooks Premier version for my accounting. And here again, even if you have different versions of the QuickBooks Financial, such as Pro, Premier, or Enterprise, the process will be fairly the same. We will not be covering QuickBooks Point of Sale in today's webinar, and that's something that we'll be covering in our next webinar, which is next Wednesday at the same time. From a payment processing standpoint, we're going to assume for my demo store that all of my payments are processed online and that my orders are already paid. And for shipping, we'll assume that I generate my shipping labels with USPS. And in an accounting stance, I will assume that all of my online orders are recorded as sales receipts in QuickBooks. For this demo, although we'll cover sales receipts in detail, we will also talk about invoices and the other different settings that are available within ECC to be able to capture all of my online orders. We'll also look at some of the best practices of how to configure QuickBooks for it to work well with ECC and your online store. And we'll try and also get through as many specific questions you have. I already see the questions windows popping up with quite a few different ones, so we'll try to get through as many of those as possible. So jumping right into the ECC demo, starting off from where we left off last week, I'll go ahead and start ECC. The first window that pops up is the login screen. I'm going to move past the login. And if you recall from our webinar the last time, we had created a sample profile that connected ECC with both my QuickBooks and my online store. And now that my profile is created, I can move forward with configuring it. Now the screen that you see in front of you, which is the Manage Profile screen, might look a little different for you because it may have only one profile. Only if you have a multi-profile edition of ECC will you see more than one choice here. So I've got a multi-profile version, and I've got this one profile set up that's for demo purposes today. I'll jump right in and click on the Configure button. The first step to configuring your profile to work between your online store and QuickBooks is to download all the settings from your online store and from your QuickBooks so that they're brought into ECC, and ECC can use those to give you a guideline of how to map the different fields as you process all of your orders in your inventory. So here, we're not downloading the actual orders from your online store, but we're downloading all the settings that you have. So as the screen shows, we can download the settings from the online store. For example, we'll get the payment method, we'll get the shipping methods, the categories for your products, the tax classes that you have set up, the manufacturers, if it's applicable to your online store, the various order statuses that are available in your online store. And in the case of Magento, you also have this additional feature, which is to download an attribute set. If you are on an OS Commerce or an XCard platform, some of these fields for the settings might vary, but again, from a setup standpoint, we'll try and cover as many of those options as possible. So first, I'm going to download all of my settings from my online store. ECC is now connecting to the store and retrieving all of those settings. We'll give that a second. Once my data and settings are downloaded successfully from the online store, the next step is to download my QuickBooks data and settings. Here, ECC is going to pull in all the customers, the items that are in QuickBooks, and all the other data. And the other data could be things like the templates, the accounts you have, the terms, the sales reps, the customer types, vendors, and so forth. Again, these are the settings that are going to be used by ECC, not only to configure the product, but also during the processing of your various transactions. So let's go ahead and click on Download Data, and here we are. The data and settings have been successfully downloaded from QuickBooks. I'm going to go ahead and hit Next. Now that ECC has all of my settings from QuickBooks and from my online store, it's going to populate all the various drop-down options that are available in my configuration. So first, let's take a look at the Transactions tab. Here, I'm going to specify how I want to record my transactions in QuickBooks. And we'll look at a couple of different choices that ECC provides. So the most common use case would be that you use the same transaction type for all of your orders. So let's say you get orders that are paid by either a credit card, they might be paid by check, they might be paid by PayPal or Google Checkout. Irrespective of the transaction payment method, you'd like to record all of your transactions as one particular transaction type. And that's the case in which you'll select this first radio button. So it says here the same transaction type for all orders. I can select from the 4 different transaction types that are available. And the transaction types are the following: invoices, sales receipts, sales orders, and estimates. Now, we won't go into as much detail in terms of what each of these transaction types are, but that's something that you might want to consult with your accountant about. But in most cases, you'll either be setting them up as an invoice or a sales receipt, because that's what happens when you get an online order. In the case where you don't have your own inventory, you may also choose sales order as the particular option. So for the purposes of this demo, let's take a quick look at both the invoice and the sales receipt options. I click on invoice, and I'm going to hit setup. So these settings that appear for invoice are the following. You'll notice on the left, these items are highlighted with the bold, and these are the required fields. The items that you see that are not bold are the optional settings. So for the template, this is a list of all the different templates that you have available in your QuickBooks company file. So in my case, in the sample company, I have a number of different invoice choices, and these are the different template settings that I have available. I also have an AR account for an invoice, which is the accounts receivable. As you may know, whenever you create an invoice, an entry gets created in your accounts receivable because that's the amount of money that you're going to be receiving for the order. So there's an AR account that must be specified. The next is the terms. These are the payment terms for the transaction. And in most cases, if your payment is already being made online, these terms are pretty much going to be due on receipt. In some cases, if you have wholesale vendors or you're using transactions where you're not collecting the money up front, you might have different payment terms. And if the terms that you'd like don't appear in this drop-down, you can simply add them to QuickBooks and go back and download those settings into ECC. The next choice I have is whether I want to mark the invoice as paid or not. Here again, if all of my payments are already being processed online, I'll most likely want to mark my invoice as paid. And if I choose the option to mark the invoice as paid, I now have the option to select what my deposit account is going to be. Again, from an accounting standpoint, you'll want to figure out how to configure all of the different settings in your QuickBooks company file so that when ECC records the transactions, it puts it into the right deposit to account. What we typically recommend is if you're using a process that charges credit cards, either say through Authorize.net or PayPal, it's a good idea to create a general account called Merchant Account. Or you may want to break that down and create an account for PayPal and create an account for Google Checkout. This way, whatever money comes in and is collected from your customer, that money will then end up not in your accounts receivable, but an entry will be added to the deposit to account. Now I see a couple of questions coming in here, so I'm going to jump in and take a quick look at those. So the first question that I see here is, what are the different options in terms of sales receipts? If you've got two versions of QuickBooks installed, if you have both QuickBooks Premier and QuickBooks Point of Sale, will ECC work with both versions? The answer to that one is a fairly simple one. ECC is capable of working with both QuickBooks Financial and with QuickBooks Point of Sale. However, the key is you've got to decide which one you want to integrate ECC with. So if you're integrating ECC with, if you're keeping track of your inventory in Point of Sale and you want to make sure that all of your orders are being properly tracked and your inventory is being deducted, then you'll want to integrate ECC with Point of Sale. If, however, you don't care about the inventory side of things and simply want to keep track of the financial side, then you'll integrate it with QuickBooks Financial. So the question on which version you integrate with is more a business decision than a limitation on the part of ECC. All right, moving back into our demo. So we looked at the transaction settings for invoices, and for sales receipts, you pretty much have a template, a sales rep, a deposit to account, and the same options for pending or to be printed. I can also select sales orders, and similar to the other options, I have templates, terms, and a transaction class. Notice that with a sales order, I don't actually have a deposit to account because a sales order implies that money has not yet been collected. Apart from my settings, if I want to use a different transaction type depending on the payment method, I have a few different choices. So if I select my radio button to use a different payment method use a different transaction type depending on my payment method, here's what I do. I select that radio button and click on Add Another Option. So the first setting it brings up, when the payment method is anything, I can use a sales receipt and hit the Setup. If I select this as the option, it's pretty much the same as using the first radio button, because in the case of any payment method, I'll use a sales receipt. But let's say I'd like to record my transactions as two different types. So let's say in my online store, when it's made by check or money order, I'd like to use an invoice. I'll go ahead and add another option. And if it's anything else, I'd like to use a sales receipt. If I'm not satisfied with those choices, I can also say, if it's Google Checkout, use a sales receipt, and specify in my setup that my deposit to account is a merchant account. I hit Save. However, if it's anything else, I want to use a sales receipt and use my deposit to account as checking. So as you can see, I can come up with a number of different combinations of how I would like to record my transactions in QuickBooks depending on the payment method that comes in. For the purposes of this demo, I'll stick with one transaction type. For all of my orders, I'll choose sales receipt and make sure that I have the right settings for my receipt and hit Save. Along with the transaction settings, I also have some additional options, and these options are applicable across the board to the different transaction types that are available. So the first option here is in terms of transaction numbering. This is the number of the transaction that comes up when you record it in QuickBooks. So if I'm using a sales receipt, QuickBooks will assign a sales receipt number. By default, ECC is set up to use whichever number QuickBooks gives to it. The other option I have is I can use my online order number. So if I'd like to have my sales receipt number correspond with the order number from the online store, I can choose that as the option. The second option I have is in regards to the transaction date. I can use the date of the order, the ship date, or the date when it's being posted to QuickBooks. So the key here is that these options will vary depending on how you like to record your transactions, but there's some best practices that you must keep in mind. So, for example, if we look at transaction numbering, if you decide to use your own online order number, then you've got to be careful that you don't have any repeat order numbers, or if you're entering transactions manually in QuickBooks, that you don't end up duplicating any transaction numbers, because that could lead to some confusion. The second, in regards to the transaction date, this is more of an accounting question. If you'd like to track your transactions based on the date that the order was placed, you can do that. Or if you prefer to do it based on the date it was shipped. Just depends on how you want to track your transactions. The third option here is in regards to the item description. So the description that ECC will put for every item that's in the sales receipt is going to be dependent on what you specify here. If I use the QuickBooks description as my option, then ECC is simply going to reuse whatever description is available in QuickBooks. Or I can choose the option to use the online product name followed by the options for that product. So for example, if I'm, say, selling an iPod, and the iPod is available in multiple colors, and I also have different memory sizes of, say, a 16 gigabyte iPod or a 32 gigabyte iPod. I may, in my online store, have these different settings as options for the products. And if I have those as options, ECC will put the option details into the description field of the item. As many of you might know, with QuickBooks Financial, there's really no way to provide the options for a product, because in QuickBooks, you pretty much have one field to record the item name or number, and you have another field to record the item description. So I have another quick question here, and I'll jump into that real quick. The question here is, does ECC make sure that point of sale won't allocate the same number as the website order number? So we're not really covering point of sale in this particular demonstration, but the answer to that question is pretty much the same for both QuickBooks and for point of sale. So if you've got, if the order number already exists in QuickBooks, then ECC won't be able to create an order with the same number. It'll basically pop up an error message saying that this order number already exists. I can't create another one. So ECC doesn't actually recreate one. It simply pops up an error message. So again, that's why you want to be careful about how you create your order numbering and your transaction numbers in QuickBooks so that you're not duplicating the numbers and creating that error. For it to post most normally, you probably want to stick with the QuickBooks numbers. And this is going to be applicable for both QuickBooks Financial and for point of sale. So jumping back into our discussion, for the item description, you have some choices. And then you have choices of what goes into the memo. The memo field in the QuickBooks transaction can be used for a number of different purposes. So it's really a free-form field. The only limitation is on the number of characters that that field can use. And so what we've provided so far is a couple of different choices. One, you can simply leave the memo as blank, or you can enter in the store name followed by the order number. So in the case where I'm not using my order number for the transaction number, I can actually use the memo to put in the store details there. I can also put the order number, the last 4 digits of the credit card, or use the order notes. Last but not least, I can override the shipping date for the particular transaction, and I have some additional choices in terms of displaying the shipping details and the payment details. And when I click on any of these checkboxes, I'm basically specifying that I'd like these settings to appear as line items in QuickBooks. They simply get posted into the description field of a no item. I'll go ahead and hit Save and Continue. Now my transactions are configured. So again, quick recap, we had a sales receipt, and we specified some options for the sales receipt, and now we're moving over to customers. The customer screen is used to specify how I'm going to match my transaction customers between QuickBooks and my online store. So as you know, in QuickBooks, I have a first name, a last name, an address, and several different fields that are applicable to the customer. However, there's one specific field, which is called the customer name field, and that's the field that we're looking to match. So let's take a look at QuickBooks and see what that looks like. As I pull up the customer, you'll notice that the first name, last name, contact, phone number, fax, etc. get populated. However, depending on my settings, there's a field that's specifically used for the customer name. And that's the field that ECC is going to use in order to match up your customers. The two options that you typically have are the two formats available in QuickBooks, which is first name, last name, or last name, comma, first name. And you can configure that in your QuickBooks preferences. But the key here to note is that the customer name, even though it is generated depending on the first name and last name that you've specified, I can always go in here and create my own customer naming convention. And depending on the customer name convention that I put here, the contact details may remain the same, but the customer name field is fairly unique to that particular customer. And that's the field ECC is going to use in order to match up my customers. So going back into ECC, the name format that ECC asks for is first name, last name, or last name, first name. I'll go ahead and select last name, first name, and if I want to use any of these other alternatives, I can also do so. The second question here is, how do you want to handle new customers? So let's say that you get an order from John Smith, and John Smith doesn't already exist in QuickBooks. In that case, how would you like ECC to handle that scenario? You have two choices. A, you can create the new customer, or instead of creating a new customer, you can use a standard customer. Now, in the cases of companies where you have hundreds and thousands of orders, in those cases, you may not want to track every single customer in your online store. and you may not want to put that customer into QuickBooks. So what you could do is you can select a standard customer, and for every order that I get, I can make that the customer for that order. So I don't really care who the customer was, but at least I'll get all the accounting details in. Now, if that's not the case for your business and you do want to track every customer, then the choice you have here is to select a customer type, and ECC will actually create the customer for you when you post it into QuickBooks. So you have a customer type, you can specify the terms, you can specify a default sales rep, you can also specify the tax code for a taxable order and non-tax code for a non-taxable order. Now, what we're trying to do here is we're setting the default options for every customer. Now, whenever a customer comes in, it's going to be created as a retail customer with certain terms, a sales rep, and a tax code. These may not be the same for every single customer that you want to process in the future, but it's a good starting point. And once your customers are in QuickBooks, you can go ahead and change their terms and assign them to different sales rep if you choose to do so. Now, a good practice here is to use a new customer every single time. If you don't want to track every single customer, simply select the first choice, and ECC will put in all of your orders against a standard customer. The third section here is for existing customers. How do you want to handle new information? So what the question is asking is, if John Smith places an order in January and John Smith places another order in March, what do you want to do about that customer's information? So obviously, since we're matching up the name criteria, as long as Smith, John exists in QuickBooks, ECC will match the existing customer and it'll record the transaction against that customer. And the question here is, if I get a repeat order from this customer, how do I account for any new information that comes in? And what we typically recommend is not to update their billing information. The reason being, when you update the billing information for a customer, that billing information will get updated for all previous transactions for that customer as well. So you want to keep the billing information the same as what came in with the order, and you can choose to update their credit card or their shipping information so that you have the latest shipping address for that customer. So we've got all the customer settings in place. We'll go ahead and hit Save and Continue. The next screen is the inventory screen. Just like the customers, whenever I get an online order, I also need to match the inventory that comes in with the online order to the inventory that I have in QuickBooks. Now, in the case of QuickBooks Financial, I really only have one field, which is the item name and number field that is unique to the product. When we cover QuickBooks Point of Sale in our next webinar, we'll talk more about some of the additional options available there. But in QuickBooks Financial, you've got one field, and in your online store, you have two options. You can either use the SKU, or sometimes it's called the product ID or model number, or you can use the product name. Now, matching of items is a very important step because in order to make sure that each of the items get recorded accurately in QuickBooks, they must have a match, and if they don't match, you're going to end up with the additional effort of having to map each of these items between the QuickBooks and the online store. So now that I've specified the matching criteria, I'll look at the second section, which is configuring how to handle missing products. Here again, what we're specifying in ECC is if I get an order, say, for an iPod, and the iPod doesn't yet exist in QuickBooks, how do I handle that missing product? You've got three choices. First, you can prompt to create the missing product or map it to another item in QuickBooks. So when ECC posts an order into QuickBooks, it'll bring up a pop-up prompt asking you to create the item or to map it to an existing item. The second choice here is to use a standard product in place of any missing product. So if I don't have the iPod, doesn't matter, just use one standard product. And here, ECC pulls a list of all the products that are available in my QuickBooks company file. The third choice is I can mark the order with an error. Now, I may use this option if I'm 100% confident that my online store should always have products that are in QuickBooks, and if it doesn't have it, let's flag the order. And so the recommended approach here is to create the missing product or map it to an existing item. I have an interesting question that just popped up, which is in regards to eBay. For eBay stores, what field is used to identify the product sold, and can it be the SKU? That's a great question, and the answer to that is basically it's specific to the particular option that you have in your online store, which is eBay. For eBay, currently ECC supports the item ID field, and in our next release, which is scheduled in September, we're going to be adding the option to match it using the custom label field. And the custom label field is something that can be used as the SKU for the product. So today with ECC, to match your products between your online store and QuickBooks, you basically can use the item ID to match it up between your online store and QuickBooks. Next is the configure product download settings. Here, I can specify in ECC how many products I want to download in a batch from my online store. The number here is going to really depend on your particular online store type. So if you've got a Magento store, an Xcart store, or an OS Commerce store, in many cases, if your settings allow, you want to do as many order downloads in a batch as possible. Now, this does not mean that ECC can't download all the items you have, but it just means it's going to download a specific number of items every time it connects to QuickBooks, every time it connects to your online store to pull in the items. And if you need some more details on this, you can definitely refer to some of our help docs. We have a lot more specifics on download settings and getting your hosting provider set up correctly. The next button here is the Advanced Inventory section. We're going to be covering a lot more of the inventory settings in our webinar that talks about inventory. For the purposes of this demo, I'll give you a quick peek at what the inventory settings screen looks like, and we'll move forward. So the inventory settings screen is all about item creation and item mapping between the online store and QuickBooks. Now, ECC comes with an add-on module, which is the inventory module, and that inventory module allows you to create new products in bulk from your online store into QuickBooks or vice versa. And with that module, you have a lot of different options for how to create the products in QuickBooks and how to create those products in the online store. So these settings are really only applicable if you have the inventory module. Now, another question that's just come up is in regards to eBay and the inventory module. So ECC's inventory module is currently available for all of the online store platforms we support. For marketplaces, we support Amazon only for the inventory module. And the feature ECC supports with Amazon is the synchronizing of products, the prices and the quantities between QuickBooks and Amazon. We're working on our inventory module for eBay as well, so hopefully in our September release, you'll get a chance to synchronize all of your products and their prices between QuickBooks and your eBay account as well. Moving on from the inventory to the next screen is the order status screen. On the order screen, we're going to specify what are the different order statuses that are available in my online store and which ones I want to bring into ECC. Now, because there are so many different types of online platforms, and almost every platform you can customize the order statuses, what we've done with ECC is rather than force ECC into a particular ordering steps, we've given you, the seller, the flexibility to set up however you want to process orders and whichever statuses of orders you want to bring into ECC. So what you see on the left is first a list of all the online statuses that are available in your online store. So let's say once a customer places an order on my store, it goes into a pending status. And when it's pending, the order is already marked paid, so I'm going to select payment status of paid, but I'm going to assume that a pending order is unshipped. And I do want to bring in all of my pending orders into ECC. Also, let's say I would also like to bring in my old transactions from the store. And all of my old transactions have already been marked as complete. So I'm going to assume that my completed orders are already paid, and I know they're complete, so they're also shipped. And I'm going to choose ECC to download those orders as well. So as you can see, depending on the order statuses I have, I can customize what the payment and shipping means for each of those statuses, and I can choose whether I want to download it into ECC or not. On the Configure Order Processing section, I can select the status of orders when I'm posting them back to the store. So if you recall our first workflow diagram, ECC can download the orders, process the labels, post it into QuickBooks, and then post it back to the online store. When it posts it back to the online store, it can update the status of the order. So here, I'm going to specify complete because that's what I'd like to use when I post it back. The next option here is a check mark whether I want to send the order completion email after posting back to the store. So ECC can notify your customer that the order has been completed along with the tracking number. And what it does is it triggers the email from your online platform. So if I check this box, I can go ahead and post my order back and notify the customer. I also have some options in terms of marking an order canceled, and I can choose if I want to send an order cancellation email from within ECC as well. For download settings, I can choose to download orders in certain batches. I can choose an order start date, and I can choose the start number from which ECC should begin downloading orders. I'll go ahead and hit Save and Continue. So quick review, we covered transactions, customers, inventory, and order mapping. Next, we'll go into payments. Now, both payments and shipping are quite vast topics onto themselves, so we'll cover a quick overview of them in this demo, and we'll be setting up additional webinars to cover payment and shipping in more detail. Specifically for payments, first question here is, do you use ECC to process offline payments? Now, ECC is a desktop application, and so it really can't process payments during the checkout steps. So that's why ECC is set up specifically for offline payments. And it provides 3 key options, and we'll browse through those quickly. The first is, no, my online store processes the payments. This will be the case in most of your online transactions because you're going to be either using Authorize.net or PayPal or some kind of an integrated payment processor. So you can just select that as the option, and ECC will bring in all the orders as paid. The second is use ECC to process offline payments. In order to process offline payments, I essentially need to have the credit card details for that transaction, which we really don't recommend. So if you really do need to process offline payments, you can still select this option. The third is if you want to use ECC to capture payments that are already authorized, but only use them to capture them within ECC. Now, if you select this option, you've got the choice of using Authorize.net or PayPal. If I wanted to use it for offline processing, I also have the option to use QuickBooks Merchant Service. For the purposes of this demo, I'll select the first option, that my online store processes the payments, and the next option here I see is mapping the payment methods and card types. So I open up that window, and what you'll see is a window that pops up showing me a list of payment methods that are available in my online store. Notice quite a few of them are grayed out, which means that these payment methods are actually disabled in the store. So if I get an online order that comes in with check or money order as that method, in QuickBooks I can map it to a particular method that I have set up. So I'll go ahead and select check for that one. If I don't have any payment information, I'm going to assume that it's been processed, let's say, with PayPal. If it's Google Checkout, I'm going to map it with Google Checkout. Now, remember, all of these drop-downs are coming based on the settings that I have in my QuickBooks company file. So if you don't have these payment methods set up, I'd recommend adding them into QuickBooks and then pulling them into ECC so that these drop-downs will show all the corresponding methods. Now, if the methods don't already exist, if they match exactly, ECC will automatically match them. But even if there's a problem with a space or a character, ECC has no way of knowing that Google Checkout, for example, if you just put in Google here, it won't know how to map it. So you want to make sure that they're both mapped one-to-one. The other aspect that you want to keep track of is to make sure that you don't have a lot of the methods, if they're not broken down correctly in your online store, you can also break them down. So here I can choose different options for my online store and disable ones that I don't want to do. So I have a couple of questions that have come up, and I'll try and get through those since we're nearing the end of our time. The question I have is, can the customer name field be customized beyond the options in ECC? And the answer to that is Perhaps. We do take a lot of feature requests from our clients. So although you can't sort of manually go in and just add whichever naming convention you like, if you have some specific rules in your QuickBooks that you want to use a different process to record your customer names, feel free to let our support team know. You can contact them, support@webgility.com, and we can add that as a feature request to our roadmap. We also do provide some customization services, so if it's something that's really urgent, we can also provide you a quote on customizing ECC so it's available for you sooner than maybe one of the next releases that we can add your feature into. So moving on in terms of the payment method and mapping section, I had a number of different choices, so I can go ahead and map these, and I hit Save and Close. Next, I'm going to hit Save and Continue, and the next screen is the shipping screen. Again, fairly simple to follow. The question here is, do you ship your online orders? Well, the key question here of why you would ship is being asked because depending on whether you ship your orders or not, your order may or may not have the field to record your shipping charges. So if I select No, I don't see any additional options. If I hit Yes, the first thing that comes up is select the QuickBooks item for shipping charges. So in ECC, I can specify what line items should be used in QuickBooks to record the shipping charges. And when we're referring to shipping charges, these are the charges that have been collected from your customer. So if you charge, say, $10 on an order, that's going to be the $10 will get recorded against this particular line item. Now notice this list is bringing up a set of items, and if you're not getting specific items here, it's pretty much because ECC here is bringing up only those items that are of the type that are service charge items or other charge items, because you don't really want to record shipping into an inventory or a non-inventory item. So I have an item called shipping created in QuickBooks, so I'll go ahead and select that. Next, I can specify which shipping processor I want to use. So in the case of ECC, I have USPS, WorldShip, Indicia, Dazzle, Stamps.com, or QuickBooks Shipping Manager. And if I choose any of these, I can select the first radio button and a number of options will appear. If I choose Other, then I can actually enter the tracking ID manually into ECC. So in many cases, we have customers that use, say, drop shipping or DHL or a shipping processor that isn't compatible with ECC. You can always use the Other option, and then you'll have the option to enter the tracking number for that particular transaction into the ECC manually. So here, let's go ahead and select USPS and take a quick look again at the different shipping processors that are available. And as we discussed previously, the shipping can be quite complex, and depending on the shipping processor you select, each of the settings may vary. So for the purposes of this demo, we won't go into too much detail about the shipping processor. We'll cover that in our detailed webinar. But to give you a quick overview, I can select WorldShip, Stamps.com, Indicia, Dazzle, USPS without postage. In this case, I'll have to go to the post office to actually pay for the postage for that order. Or I can use QuickBooks Shipping Manager if I use the UPS or FedEx capability within QuickBooks Shipping Manager. So I have another quick question here that's come up. If we aren't ready to add the shipping integration at setup, can that setting and integration be made later? Great question. So in general, all the settings for ECC can be modified at any time. So whenever you've specified the shipping, the payment, the order statuses, the customer matching, irrespective of what settings you have, you can always jump back to the profile configuration and edit a setting, hit Save and Continue, and then continue where you left off with the orders. So nothing here is kind of written in stone. It's all kind of flexible. You can change things as you like. The only caveat here is that, let's say under my order settings, if I specified that my completed orders are paid and shipped, and if I download them into ECC, they're already going to be marked paid and shipped. Now if I decide my completed orders are unshipped, ECC won't be able to adjust the old orders, so you'll have to kind of delete those orders and bring them back in. But in general, all the settings that you have here can be modified. I have another question. If I use eBay to ship my products, will the tracking number be imported with the order? So ECC does bring in all the fields that are associated with the order into the ECC dashboard. So if you are using eBay or you're using Amazon, whatever details are available with that order, if the tracking number is in the proper tracking number field in the order, ECC will be able to download that order as well, and it'll bring in that corresponding field. Okay, continuing where we left off, so you've got a couple of choices in terms of the shipping processor, and once you've selected the shipping processors, I can click on Configure Shipping, and once I hit Configure Shipping, it populates these different tabs. So I can select the settings for Stamps.com, for Indicia Dazzle, and for USPS. For the purposes of this demo, let's just select USPS. I hit Configure. I'm going to choose Browse and say I like to put my labels into that demo folder, and most of our mail is to Express. I do want delivery confirmation, and I like to use this as my default printer, and I want to enable international shipping. Or I can uncheck that and hit Save. Once those settings are configured, now ECC is ready and able to process transactions using that specific process. Apart from my shipment settings here, we also added a new feature with our 2.6 release, which is the support for weight scales. So ECC now supports the Mettler Toledo weight scale, and you can, Mettler Toledo PS60 is the USB scale, and once you have that connected, you can click on Show Devices and be able to configure that shipping weight scale. Similar to the payment method mapping, I also have a list of shipping methods. Again, on the left, I see all the online store methods, and on the right, I see QuickBooks. So I have one shipping method called Fixed, and whenever it's fixed, I like to record it as the UPS option. I hit Save and Close. Now, this shipping method in ECC is the field that is available in the Ship Via field. So as you look at a sales receipt in QuickBooks, you're basically going to be able to customize your sales receipt layout so it shows you the Ship Via field, and that's what ECC pulls in. I have another question here about the payment. Does ECC pull in the credit card number and expiration date from Authorize.net into QuickBooks? So ECC does not connect to Authorize.net to download the order. ECC is actually downloading the order from your online store. So when it's downloading the order, if your online store has all the payment details like the credit card number, the expiration date, and the transaction ID, then it'll pull that in. Typically, it's not a great idea to save your credit card numbers in your online store. So the best practice really is to use ECC to pull down the transaction ID and the payment method, but not really the specific credit card details. I'll hit Save and Continue. The next question, next topic we have is the taxes and discounts. Again, a very vast subject that we could cover in a lot of detail in a webinar by itself. So I'll kind of go through it as an overview. You have a few different choices with ECC. You can assume the first, which is if your online store does not charge any taxes, or the second is use QuickBooks to calculate taxes. If you're using QuickBooks to calculate taxes, then ECC will record the taxes into the exact tax field. So let's take a quick look into QuickBooks and where that appears. So if I put up a sales receipt, you'll notice here that there's a tax setting. Now, with that setting of using QuickBooks to calculate taxes, I don't have the option to specify an amount. Whatever percentages, for example, with Arizona, I have 8.1%. Whatever percentages I have specified, it matches up and it records it as a sales tax. And remember, even if an order is non-taxable, you want to set up a tax item in QuickBooks with 0% so that you can record the taxes when they're 0. Going back into ECC, here I have the choice to use the tax item for taxable orders. I have a tax item for non-taxable orders. And if I collect taxes in multiple states, that means if my business is located in multiple states, I can also set up tax locations across different states. Again, for this demo, we'll skip past that, and we'll cover that in more detail in our tax webinar. The next option is using ECC and transferring the taxes from my online store. So if the online store has already charged your taxes, you can record the taxes as a line item. So let's take a look at how it appears in QuickBooks. So in QuickBooks, apart from this out-of-state option, I can also select my sales tax as a line item in the transaction. And if I use that as a line item, I can pull in exactly the value that came in from my online store and record it into QuickBooks. So that's what the second option does. What we recommend is using QuickBooks to calculate taxes. Also, if in the rare case that you have some products that are taxable and some products that are not, you can also set up tax variations. And if you have variations per item, you can mark taxable items and non-taxable items. Again, a little bit much detail to be covered in our tax webinar, but for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to assume AZ sales tax and unselect the option for tax variation per item. For discounts, I can again select a box and ECC pulls in all the items that are of type discount in QuickBooks. And here, ECC is bringing in only specific items. And so if I have a discount item, it'll pull that in. If I don't, I can create it, hit the refresh button, and ECC will download the new setting from QuickBooks. Also, in the case of Magento, I have a store credit, and ECC can also record store credit into particular items. I hit Save and Continue. The last setting here is the packing slip. For packing slip, I can specify a company logo, the text in the footer. If I have a multi-page packing slip, for example, if I have a lot of orders that come in with many, many items, I can display a header, repeated header on the same, on every single page. The other option I have is in regards to the display options. So if I want to display the order notes, the customer comments, the shipping methods, the QuickBooks transaction ID, the pricing, and specific item details, I can also customize that. So that was a quick overview of the detailed settings that you can configure in ECC. We talked about how to record your transactions, how to configure customers, how to set up your inventory settings and to match them up, how to download orders that are specific order types, the payment processing, the shipment, the taxes and discounts, and the packing slip. So once I hit Save and Close, ECC now takes me to the dashboard. All of my settings are now in effect. I can pretty easily just click on the Get Orders button. ECC is going to connect to my online store. It's going to pull in all the orders that came in. And depending on my settings for my orders, it'll create the right tabs for me. It's going to have all the customers brought in. It'll have all the items, the taxes, and their settings. I go over to the New Orders tab. So you'll notice here I've got some orders that are paid, some orders that are paid and shipped, but depending on my settings. So let's take a quick look. I see a paid order. I'll go ahead and double-click on it. I'll see the details of the order. The credit card details came in. The shipping details came in from the online store. I've got shipping, total amount. As I look at the history, this order was received in a pending status. If I look at another order here from a test user, it was paid and shipped. If I look at the history, this order was brought in with a completed status. So ECC, depending on the statuses that I had, brought in everything for that particular order. And you can see the details of the order simply by double-clicking it or right-clicking the order. Also, now that the order is in here, I can simply select the order. I can click on Process Shipping. It brings up the USPS option. I can generate the USPS shipping label. If I want to change the weight, I can change it. Now that the label is generated, I can hit Print, and I'll be able to print out that label. I hit Close, and you'll notice the order's been marked shipped. Now that the order is shipped, I can simply click on Post to QuickBooks. And since all of my settings have been configured, ECC has successfully posted the order to QuickBooks, the sales receipt is created, and because I had the right customer matching, it already found Parag Testing 2 in QuickBooks, and the existing customer has been updated. You'll notice a green checkbox. I can click the checkbox. It brings up the particular transaction in QuickBooks. Notice it brought in the right payment method, the ship via fields, the item details, the shipping was recorded under the shipping transaction item, the payment method, the shipping method, and all the priority mail and tracking number details are brought in with the order. So that completes my posting to QuickBooks, and last but not least, I can hit Post to Store, and the order is now going to get posted back to the store, and it's going to show up as a completed order with the completed status. And it's also subsequently going to be moved from ECC, from the New Orders tab, over into the Completed tab. So I have another quick question that's come up here, and the question here is, I have a trial version that expired. How can you get purchase a copy? And also, I have another question is, you have a trial version, how do you get an extension? So we do provide one-time extensions. You can contact our support team, support@webgility.com, with your original email that you use for the original trial, and they'll send you back the instructions on how to extend your trial. And of course, if you're looking to purchase ECC, you can simply go to our online store by going to webgility.com/store, and there you have an option to purchase the ECC license. Once you purchase the license, we'll send you back all the details so you can activate it. You don't need to reset it up again. You can just use the settings that you originally have. So in this demo, we kind of covered all the settings for ECC. We covered how to get the transactions configured, the taxes, the discounts, and we were able to post a transaction successfully into QuickBooks. In our subsequent webinars, we're going to cover shipping. We're going to cover taxes in more detail. In our next webinar, we're going to cover QuickBooks Point of Sale in more detail. So we're kind of out of time, and we changed the format a little bit since there were quite a few questions. We covered as many as we could. I do see there's a few pending questions, and we'll try and follow up on those as much as we can following the webinar. Again, if you have any sales-related questions, you can email us at sales@webgility.com. If you have support questions, as always, feel free to reach out to our support team at support@webgility.com. Please do send us your feedback from our survey, and appreciate all of your feedback in your business. Thanks again, and have a great day.